It's a little later on because, you know, stuff happens. And we got a front to do. Let's get this thing ripped apart. First thing we're gonna do, drop the skid plate. Drop it! And loosen the control arms. First thing, skid plate. 12 millimeter. And just let her hang. If you want to, you can go ahead and pop this off. I may here in a second. There's one push pin and two 10 millimeter screws that hold it together. But I think we'll be okay. Once we do that, 17 on the sway bar. Just like the rear, you want it to go kind of slow. And the KBSS cylinder is going to push that down. Stick our bolts back in our caps so we don't lose them. All right, so on the lower control arm bolts, you want to loosen those so that the bushings aren't in a bind, just like we did on the rear. And these are a 22. They're pretty stout. The bolt gets loosened in the front, and on the back, it's the nut. Same thing, about a turn. And while you got that tool out, you might as well go ahead and do the other side. All right, so we're out of a bind there. Now, before you start loosening a bunch of other stuff up, we want the weight of the spring pushing down on the control arm because we have to separate this ball joint. So you just push in, pull that out a little bit, get your pin out of the way. This is a 19. Crack that dude loose. Sometimes on these new cars, it'll pop right out, which this one's trying to. All right, you want to leave it on about where the castellation stops, so that way you got 3 or 4 threads there. Break out your BFH, and give it a few whacks right here on this flat spot. And there she goes. All right, so leave that loose.
Many tic-tacs later.
Now we're gonna do the same thing on the tie rod. Pull your cotter pin back. You wanna try to save this one or have a new one. All right, and this one's also a 19. Same trick, crack it loose. Run the nut up most of the way, and then give it a few calculated whacks right about here. And if you put a little bit of pressure on it, it'll pop right out after a couple hits. If it's being stubborn and you feel like you need to hit it on the top, make sure the top of the nut is flush with the stud, because you don't want to mess up the castellated nut or the threads on the end of the stud. There it goes. And it's less about how hard you hit it and more just the fact that you're hitting it and shocking it. So then you can pull your tie rod out of the way. Okay, at this point, you've got 2 important bits of hardware. This is your ABS wire. You'll note the routing. It goes on the outside of the control arm, so your control arm goes inside. So we're gonna loosen this. And then this 10 millimeter bolt right here, which is probably easier with a ratchet. So what that does is takes all the strain off of the ABS speed sensor wire. Once you got those off, you want to take off this 12 millimeter head bolt so that you've got a little bit of flex in the front. Okay, so now we've got that taken care of. We can pull our spindle out of the way, our knuckle. So pull down on the upper, and it's got some tension in the bushings. You know, I'm talking about tension in the bushings. You can see that. This spindle can hang free now. You don't want to pull on it because you will pull the shaft out of the inner joint. So just kind of let it chill right there. Next thing is the 19 millimeter bolt and nut at the bottom of the strut. Get it loose. You don't have to take it out, or you're not going to be able to take it out at this time because the next thing we do is up top. So you got 3 studs holding the upper strut hat, which is this part protruding through that holds the strut together and holds the spring in tension. You got 3 nuts, 1, 2, and a third one on the back here. This is where your flex head ratchets really come into play, especially if you put them on the right way. So I always loosen the rear one first because it's the hardest one to get to. There we go. And those are a 14 millimeter. So if you loosen it first before you touch these other ones and go ahead and take it out, then you don't have to fight it. Keep these. You're gonna need them. And then the front ones. And once again, for speed, the easiest thing to do is go ahead and run that up most of the way. And then you got your last one. Right now, the only weight holding the strut down is the coil and the control arm and such. All right, since we are replacing the upper control arm, even if we weren't, we still would want to loosen it. So we're gonna loosen the nut right here. Pay attention to the orientation of the washer, right there. All right, so once the bushings are loose, this thing's less than finger tight. Go ahead and run this out. There's the nut and the washer. See how the washer seats against the bushing on this side and the washer on this side. So you want it to bell out, which may be counterintuitive, but that's how it works. You can see the bushing has already deflected even in a stock application with 2,000 miles and rubbed it. That's why it's offset like that. Set those aside. All right, so just take the arm loosely in one hand, push the bolt. You can work the washer down. If you use the washer as a pincher, you can work the bolt out. You may hit a point where there's some interference, but sometimes you don't. 4Runners are worse. Tacomas, you actually have to like put vice grips on this and pull it away, or channel locks, in order to get it. There's a tight spot right there. You just use the washer and push it through, and it'll come right out. Don't worry about taking the bolt all the way out of the car, because you're gonna reuse it. So you can just leave it hanging right there. At this point, this arm is free, and if yours is good, you can post it on Facebook, and if yours is bad, you can throw it in the scrap bin. All right, at this point, our strut assembly is pretty free. So as you can see, we can wiggle it. So we'll go ahead and take the nuts off of the top. Set those aside for usage here in just a few minutes. Go ahead and pull the hardware from the bottom. That also is reused. So here we're going to push down on the control arm, pull the bolt out of the bottom. You'll notice the strut drops down. It can now wiggle. All right, so what we want to do is lift up, pull out at the bottom. Sometimes you got to push down on that arm just a little bit. And then it goes down right behind the sway bar and clears at the top. The strut comes right out. Now, the strut will come out with the control arm in place, but you do have to loosen it up either way. So if you're replacing control arms, order of operations matters, and it'll go a lot smoother and a lot faster if you do the strut work in between the arms.
All right, guys, that concludes episode 3 of our Dobinsons IMS install series on this 2023 Lexus GX460 Blackline Edition. Jump down in the comments, let us know what you're liking so far, or if you would do something a little bit differently. Otherwise, make sure you like, subscribe, smash that bell, share with your friends, and if you'd like to see other cool content on the channel, click this link right here.